Hello everybody, and thank you for coming back to the channel. Firstly, happy Halloween! I hope that this video will get up to you on Halloween, but if not, I do apologise. Work has been very hectic. I meant to do much more for Halloween, tell you about the Calan Gaeaf, which is the Welsh Halloween, but like I said, work has been very hectic. I will still upload those videos, but they will not be up before Halloween. But if you're like me, Halloween carries on until December, so I think you'll be sorted. Secondly, I'd like to apologise if you can hear my cat in the background. He is being very whiny and needy today, and if I shut him out of the room, he will cry and cry and cry at the door and just be a disruption. So he's currently sat behind me on the sofa, but if you hear him, I'm sorry. I'll do my best, but anyway. So today I'm going to be telling you some Welsh spooky stories, or some myths, or some ghost stories. Wales is full of haunted places. There are books, I have several, that are just full of places to go that are said to be haunted. And I've compiled some of my favourites for you. So without further ado, let's get into it. This first story was, I cannot take credit for finding this. I watch a channel and I highly recommend him, called Shrouded Hand, and he grew up in Wales, I believe, and he did an investigation into this place I'm going to talk about a few years ago now, but I watched his video and I thought it was so interesting, so I looked into the story more. And on that video, he also showed some books that he reads, and one is Wales of the Unexpected by Richard Holland, and this is where I get a great deal of my information from. So I will link Shrouded Hand's video down below. Please go and check it out and subscribe to him. He does fantastic content and he's a huge inspiration for me. And so the place that Shrouded Hand investigated, and the place I'm going to be telling you about, is Wepper Park. And in Wepper Park, there is a castle called Iolo Castle that was built there. Now, it is interesting that the Iolo was built there, because it's not a very good place to build a castle. They believe that it was built there for secrecy, because it is shrouded in, no pun intended, in trees, and it's not easy to find. And the oldest part of the castle is believed to be the Welsh Tower, which was built in the early 1200s by Llywelyn Fawr, or Llywelyn the Great. And it was completed in 1257 by Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, a different Llywelyn, after recapturing it from the English. So, as you can imagine, it is a very battle-drenched area, and so there are several ghosts that are said to haunt Iolo Castle, but the most well-known one is a glowing female figure who's said to climb the Welsh Tower during thunderstorms and sings in an unearthly, haunting and high voice. Strange lights have also been seen around the site during thunderstorms and otherwise. And a report comes from a teenager who was visiting Wepper Park, Chris Priest, with his uncle. They were there at night and they reported hearing sounds of battle drumming and stamping feet marching towards the castle. And it's been said that perhaps this was Llywelyn's and his army's final fateful march to that castle. There are many more stories of haunted castles I could tell you, so perhaps this will be for another video. But besides manors and castles, the most haunted places are pubs or inns or hostels. Now this is because they are often very old, and the oldest is Skirrid Inn in Monmouthshire. Now I have another channel to recommend to you, and again I will link this video down below, hopefully if I remember. The channel is called World of Mr. Grey. Not Mr. Grey as in 50 Shades of Grey. Mr. Grey is in the Stephen King character. Now Dan, who runs the channel, is Welsh, and he went on a investigation. He is a skeptic, he does debunking videos, but he went on an investigation. He was invited along by a paranormal group and to be the skeptic there, to make sure they weren't doing anything like making noises or doing editing or anything like that. Now, he didn't capture anything on his camera, but I still think that it's a very good video because it shows how spooky the pub is and how old it is as well. The vibe I got from watching that was just scary. Now, Skirridin is, I believe, about 800 years old. It's I think the oldest one in the UK. No, sorry, the oldest one in Wales, not the UK. And a man was sentenced to death for stealing sheep, I know. And he was hanged in the inn from the beams. And over the next 800 years, 182 felons were hanged there. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, this pub is said to be very, very haunted. The ghosts there are said to be violent, loud, aggressive. They will throw things, they will make noises, and perhaps most disturbingly to me is that patrons have reported feeling nooses slip around their necks. Another tale of a haunted pub is in the Pwllgwyn, a pub and restaurant near Carywys in Flintshire. The landlord there has said that his staff often saw a phantom monk sitting quietly by the window, often in daylight. The Pwllgwyn is said to stand on the site of a medieval pilgrim's hostelry, which might explain the monk's presence. And the area manager at the Golden Lion in Rosset, Wrexham, he was a level-headed man. He was a skeptic, and so he decided one day to sleep in a certain room because he was concerned about the growing reputation of this pub being haunted. He didn't believe it, and he wanted to disprove these rumours. But he appeared to have ended up proving it, because in the night he ended up having a game of tug-of-war with a ghost, and the ghost was trying to yank his bedclothes off, and the ghost won. However, if you have come from my Tumblr, you've probably already seen my rant on this. I think that, especially Welsh pub stories, they should often be taken with a heavy, heavy pinch of salt, because often the owners will either make up these stories of haunted pubs or they will capitalise on it. But, however, I'm going to leave an article in the description by the man who either still owns or did own the Skirridin pub, because I still think it's interesting to read about it. Now I'm going to tell you about an old legend of a body of water that is haunted by the pitiful wailing of the ghost. The name of this haunted spot is Llyn nad y Forwyn, which I believe translates to the Lake of the Maiden's Cries. However, this place is not actually a lake. It is a deep pool in Afon Colwyn, just north of Beddgelert. The folklorist Elias Owen wrote about it in 1896, but he was unaware of its location and just assumed that it was a full-size lake. But regardless, here is the Owen's version of the legend. It is said that a young man was about to marry a young girl, and one evening before the wedding they were rambling along the waterside together. But the man was false and loved another better than the woman he was about to wed. They were alone in an unfrequented country, and the deceiver pushed the girl into the lake to get rid of her so he could marry his sweetheart. She lost her life, but ever afterwards her spirit troubled the neighbourhood, but chiefly the scene of her murder. She sometimes appeared as a ball of fire rolling along Afon Conway. At other times she appeared as a lady dressed in silk, taking a solitary walk along the banks of the river. At other times groans and shrieks were heard coming out of the river, just such screams as would be uttered by a person who was being murdered. Sometimes a young maiden would be seen emerging out of the waters, half naked with dishevelled hair that covered her shoulders, and the country resounded with her heart-rending crying as she appeared in the lake. The frequent crying of the spirit gave the lake its name, Llyn nad y Forwyn. These days, Llyn nad y Forwyn is seen as a very dangerous place. In modern times, there are danger notices warning of strong currents in deep water, as the pool is a deep pool with slippery sides, which means that if you get in, you might struggle to get out. I'm reading this story from the book by Richard Holland that I mentioned earlier, and he says, "Today it is overhung with trees, shrubs and other vegetation, making it darker and spookier than it was a century ago, and unfortunately impossible to photograph. Strangely, on my ramble in search of the pool, it was a weird cry I heard coming from the undergrowth, which led me to it. the cry may have been that of a bird, or perhaps a fox. Perhaps. And now I want to tell you about the Angelastor. I believe it is pronounced like that, but I apologise if not. The Angelastor story takes place in a village called Llangyrnu, which is near Llanrwst, and they learn their fate from the Angelastor under the 3,000-year-old yew tree that sits in the churchyard. Every Halloween and July 31st, the Angelastor will appear there and announce in a solemn voice in Welsh the names of all the parishioners that will die that year. And this next one isn't necessarily a ghost story, but I do find it very interesting and very spooky. And I'm going to tell you about Merlin's Oak in Carmarthen. Now, Merlin, or Merddin, as is his Welsh name, he is said to have planted an oak. He's said to have planted an oak in the middle of Carmarthen, and he placed a curse on it, saying if this oak tree was ever removed or damaged, the town or village of Carmarthen would be flooded and drowned. In the 1970s, I forget which, but the oak was either caught on fire or was set on fire. And so after that, it was so badly damaged, it was removed. And after that, for many years afterwards, Carmarthen faced some of the worst floods it had seen in years. And I find this one interesting, because if it was a coincidence, it's a very, very strange coincidence that the oak just happened to be removed right before flooding, and it happened to coincide with Merlin's curse. I do find that very interesting and very spooky. And now I'm going to tell you about the Guardians of the Graves. In Llanelli churchyard, the ghost of a dog is often seen, said to have once been owned by a local man by the name of Colonel Sandeman. After Colonel Sandeman died, his loyal dog would sit on his grave and pine and refuse to leave. So after the dog died, they placed a statue of the dog on the grave after his death. Locals started to talk about sinister shadows of the dog that would be seen by passers-by at night, and poachers coming down from the mountain would say that their dog's hackles would go up and they would refuse to pass the graveyard. However, the sight of ghost dogs is not uncommon in Welsh graveyards. If you have watched my video on a gwyllgi, you will know that dogs are often seen in graveyards and are said to be guardians of death and of sacred places. Superstitious lore in Wales meant that folk believed that the first person to be buried in a graveyard would be fated to stay earthbound evermore to be the guardian of the graves. Nobody wanted to do that, and so it was often the case that a dog would be buried there instead for that purpose. And so the guardian of the graves is often cited as a ghostly dog who will snarl and prowl the churchyards at night. And now I'm going to tell you about the Gwrach Rhibyn, which is one of the most terrifying Welsh apparitions. The main thing that makes her distinct is her ugliness, and she is a rare female goblin, and a common saying in Wales used to be Mai mor salw y Gwrach Rhibyn, which means she is as ugly as the Gwrach Rhibyn. She is hideous to look at, having dishevelled black hair, long black teeth, long lanky withered arms, leathery wings, and a corpse-like appearance. She comes in the still of darkest nights, and you hear her flap her wings against the window, and at the same time a blood-curdling howl, and the name of the person about to die. She calls their name in a lengthy dying tone, and her shrieks are said to be utterly horrific to hear. She sometimes appears on a mountainside if it is misty, or at a crossroads, or by a body of water. One of my favourite aspects of Welsh ghost stories is how they look different. So they will often be whirling, walking on their hands or on fours, and distorting their shapes to scare people. And often there are some cases, there are some cases of ghosts of people who are still alive. There was one story that I read a few years ago of a woman who was just doing her dishes, and she glanced out of her kitchen window, and she saw across the street there was a house, and in that house was a man who she knew very well was alive and he was okay. But strangely, on top of the house, on the roof, she saw the man, but he was slightly transparent. He was on all fours, and he had his head screwed on backwards, and he was skittering across the roof. And so, yeah, he was. And so she, obviously in a panic, she rushed over there to make sure that the man was okay. She knocked on the door. The man had just woken up from a nap, and so he was very confused. And since then, the woman has believed that Welsh people can be ghosts even when they're still alive. The Welsh ghosts, the dead ones, not the live ones. Sounds like an oxymoron. No. Is it an oxymoron? I don't know. Anyway, I'm rambling. Will often be said to be whistling or humming or making strange sounds. Another tale goes that a man by the name of Lewis Thomas was returning from a journey and he was passing a field, and he witnessed a ghost of a man whirling on his hands and feet. And when a John Jenkins hanged himself in the hayloft near Abertillery, his sister discovered his body and let out a scream. Jeremiah Jones, who lived in the nearby house, upon hearing the scream, looked in that direction only to see the figure of a man emerging from the hayloft upside down and moving violently towards the direction of the river. One freakish ghost, sighted by Thomas Andrew in the parish of Lanhithel, claims to have seen a creature or a ghost whirling across a wall on all fours and making a horrible mowing sound, shaking his head from side to side. I believe in ghosts. I do believe that often it's only rational sometimes. But what do you think? Do you believe in ghosts? I would like to hear your opinions if you are a believer, if you're a skeptic, if you're open-minded. But my opinion on ghosts is that I believe they're real because science dictates that Science dictates that energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed. So where does human energy go when we die? We are literally just made up of electrical energy. That's all we are. And so if energy can't be destroyed, where does our energy go? Perhaps it goes into the ground and the energy is sucked in by a tree. I believe that's reincarnation. Or perhaps if you die in a house, your energy will just go into the walls, and I believe that is what ghosts are, just human energy and memories. I don't have many ghost stories that I am willing to tell. I have some. Some I'm not even sure really happened, but I think my most recent one was after my mother passed, and a few months later, I've been having dreams about her. And I was not doing very well. I was drinking more, and I'd stopped eating as well. And I'd had a lot of dreams about her, but they were always the standard ones, I love you, blah, blah, blah. But this one was strange. It was different. I walked into her house, and I knew she was dead, and she knew she was dead. But she spoke to me anyway, and she basically said to me, "You are fucking up your life. I don't want this." She gave me a hard talk, and perhaps this was just my mind telling me what I needed to hear in the only way I would hear it. But ever since then, it's just every other time I dreamt about my mum, it had been loving, and this time, she kicked the shit out of me. So, I do wonder, was that her ghost? Perhaps that's all ghosts are, just our minds. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up this video now. I am going to put my bread dough in the oven. Now it is risen. So, happy Halloween, and I hope you have a good one. And thank you for being here.